Okay. Does anybody have any reason that we shouldn't start now? Okay. So speak now or forever hold your peace, because once I get started, there's no telling where we're going to end. I have not changed my PowerPoint from last time, so to my shame and embarrassment, these are all going to say week 1. I will own that badge of dishonor. And understand that as we go on, maybe we'll finish it all today, maybe not. And if we do more than this, like this goes another 3 sessions, you'll see, man, he was really planning on saying all of this and teaching all of this within 1 week. So I'm just going to leave it up there, and then I'm just going to start making big packets of information. So all of the notes that you have encompass everything that I was originally planning to go over. So you can cheat by looking ahead or doing additional information if any of this catches your eye. But yeah, I will do like a large unit at a time, or I don't know about large, but a unit at a time, and then we'll just see how far we can get, and I'll have notes and handouts for all of it in regards to that. Are we recording up there? Sweet. Then we'll go ahead and get right into it. If you'll recall, the last time we met, we were talking about the Jewish context of the immediate aftermath of what happens in the New Testament. We looked at the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and the Zealots. We looked at how, even though they're all sort of in the same area, they didn't all really get along, and they didn't agree about very much all, except for the fact that they were Jewish, and there were a few things that united them, but beyond that, they were very different people. Now we're going to go to the opposite end of the equation. We're going to talk about the Romans. So the first thing we're going to look at is the Roman rule. And this is going to cover a little bit from 63 BC to AD 70. If you will recall, that's the area or the era that we looked at last time where they actually fell underneath direct Roman rule. And in fact, it's because, even though they were kind of sort of allies with the Romans, but when the Romans came in and basically said, this is our land now, you are going to serve us, the Jewish people were very, very irritated with that. Just 400 years previously, they had come from Babylonian and Persian captivity, and now they're sort of in their own area. They just fought off the Seleucid Empire with the help of Rome, and now Rome is basically saying, you are ours now. They didn't like that a lot. They're a very proud people. They are God's chosen people. There is nobody over them except for God, which is part of why they decided to fight the Romans in the way that they did, like the Zealots. So the Romans occupy all of the Mediterranean Europe, all of North Africa, and the Middle East. There are a whole lot of things that take this large area that's very diverse in its, the cultures that are encompassed in there, the climates, the types of people that are in there, but there are a bunch of things that really bring these people together. The first thing is that there is political unity, or rather political loyalty. Who's in charge of the Roman Empire? It's the emperor. There is one man who is in charge over all of it. It is his government, and it is based in the capital city of Rome. A few hundred years previously, in about 510 BC, there was a political revolution that transformed the empire into a republic. So people get say in what happens in the government. There are aristocratic and democratic elements that sort of blend into the way that they run things, and it really makes them hostile to a monarchy. Might sound a little bit like America, and that's absolutely the case. However, there were a few civil wars in the 1st century BC because one man rose to prominence, and wouldn't you know it, because the Romans are allergic to monarchies and one man having supreme power, they decided to introduce him to a lot of blades. That man was Julius Caesar, and after he died, there was a lot of fallout. Essentially, the Roman Empire was split into 4-ish main groups. Lots of fighting. They couldn't really agree on what to do with that, so there's a little bit of fragmentation to the republic. What happens when you have a fragmented group of people? You need one unifying factor. Enter Caesar Augustus, who is kind of a big deal. I do not have enough time to go into why he is such a big deal, but this man was so good at his job. He reigned from 27 BC to AD 14, and he's the reason why last month was called August. August becomes a title that means a very big deal. He sees himself as, if not a god, then the son of a god, and he is so successful that Rome will never be a republic again. It will always be an empire because this man became emperor. Everything that Caesar was perceived to be or threatened to be, Caesar Augustus comes in and makes it his, it's his thing now. It's his sandbox. It's his ball. He can do whatever he wants now on the playground. So there's also political and social stability. There is the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace. Augustus provides political and social stability, which means that there's a unifying language, there's a unifying currency throughout all of this. Everybody's loyal to the emperor. There are not a lot of civil wars being fought. We already took down the Seleucids. Things are just kind of okay right now. We don't have any foreign powers who are actively trying to fight us. People are sort of getting along. And because of this, and because Greek is so prevalent within the Roman Empire, if you remember, we talked about there were Hellenizers last time. There were these people who were enamored with Jewish society and the Jewish religion, but they didn't want to go all the way up to circumcision. Pardon me. But in so doing, there was a really big draw towards the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures. And so at this point, actually before this point, they were able to translate the Old Testament into Greek. It's where we get the Septuagint from. The LVXX, I believe it is. The Septuagint, or the 70, essentially. Yes. The Septuagint. So they have all these people, you can, if you are in Jerusalem, you can go over to Spain, and you can talk to the people there, and you can spend money there. And you can travel there very easily because there are roads. The Romans have united all of their empire under political stability, economic stability. There's peace. Everything's really doing pretty well, and you could probably call this the golden age of the Roman Empire. So there's peace instead of constant tribal war. There's a great network of roads and bridges. We take bridges for granted now, but back then bridges were a huge deal because no longer do you have to try and ford the river or go to a shallower part of it, but now you can just walk directly over it. You can save yourself days of travel time with just a few sticks and stones that go over the top of water. It's crazy. Because the Romans have a very prolific navy, they can clear the sea of pirates, so that way now, instead of just having to rely upon the roads, you can now trade via the sea against all these places. The Mediterranean is theirs. You can go from Italy down to Carthage, Egypt, all of northern Africa, that whole area in the Mediterranean, that is theirs. They own the land, they own the sea. No airplanes, so they don't own the skies yet. They're not going to own the skies. They're going to fall before airplanes are invented. And because of this, there are Roman officials, centurions, cops, essentially, who are everywhere, who can then enforce the peace as well. So that way, if you have a squabble or some kind of confrontation, they can be there to mitigate that. And if people show up and start to, become thieves, robbers, if they start inciting riots, the Romans can put that down. So there's a great deal of peace right here. I already briefly mentioned the economy. There's a lot of trade happening between coastal cities, fish, crops, wine. It's being exported from every region to every other region. The Roman Empire is sitting very pretty. And they've also got a very good intellectual and religious culture, which isn't actually Roman because they stole it. There are plenty of places that will tell you that the Romans conquered the Greeks, but the Greeks really conquered the Romans because the Romans basically took over Greece and that whole area after Alexander the Great passed away and his little empire fractured. But the Romans were like, man, this Hellenized stuff is actually pretty cool. We want your gods, we want your philosophy, we want your cities, we want your everything. So essentially, it's still Greek, but they call it Roman. And in fact, they did probably what I guess I would call it the most American thing, but really we're doing the Roman thing where this is really cool. We're going to take it and put a different name on it and incorporate it into our culture, so now it's ours. Sort of. That's what they did. So the Greek god Mars becomes Ares. etc. They sort of like change a few things in there, and like, you thought it was Greek heroes. Well, here are a couple of Roman heroes as well. Is sort of it. So the dominant culture is not actually Roman, but it is Greek. The end of the 4th century BC, the language and the values of the Greek civilization had spread from Greece across the entire Eastern world. Rome's armies had defeated Greece, but Greece's culture overwhelmed them. Here's a quote. By the 1st century BC, the Greek language, Greek methods of education, Greek art and literature, and Greek philosophy and science had taken root across the entire Roman Empire. Greek is the first language spoken by the Eastern Empire and the second language of the Western Empire. And that'll make more sense as we get into a couple of hundred years in the future, because the Roman Empire gets so big that really there starts to become this schism between the Eastern side and the Western side of things. So keep that in the back of your mind. Eventually, like after Rome becomes Christian, and I put that in heavy air quotes because yes, but maybe not actually, kind of, sort of. There are going to be two competing halves of the empire, and this is going to explain partially why the Roman Empire is not around today. Really big pillar of the Roman idea of how to run things is based on philosophy. They inherited a lot of that from the Greeks. The 1st and 2nd centuries AD saw how some of the earlier philosophy sort of got distilled, and then they came back, and then they went away. In fact, there are like 3 different types of Plato's philosophy that are taught. There's like Middle Plato philosophies around this era, if that makes sense to anybody here. Really, I'm going to bring up Stoic and Cynic philosophy. Stoicism is named for the stoa, which is the hallway where the leader of that, or the instigator of that particular philosophical thought comes from. They essentially say that the highest sort of thing that you can go for is virtue. Virtue is the chief end. That is the highest form of good. Nothing else can provide it. So stoa. If we say that somebody is stoic because they're just very like even-faced, nothing really affects them. That means like even if you give me something good, like if you give me a delicious meal, like if somebody gives me free donuts for dinner, for example, that's not going to give me any real good because it doesn't provide virtue. So I can't allow this to influence my life because it doesn't provide me with virtue. So even though it's good, it's not like actually good, is how I can distill hundreds of years of thought into just a couple of sentences using an example provided by the immediate context of the fact that somebody provided donuts. Thank you. Cynics and cynicism likewise are kind of like that, but to the extreme. And not only would they not find happiness or good in donuts, they would be they would reject the donuts outright. In fact, I might use donuts as like the baseline for introducing philosophical thoughts and arguments from now on. That's pretty good. So if you come up to a cynic and you give them donuts, they would say, why would I want that? It doesn't provide anything for me. So while Stoics might be like, I accept the donuts. I don't see them as like a high form of good, but I accept that they're there and that I can enjoy them. Cynics would say, no, there's no good that can come of it at all, so why even do this? So they're going to shun worldly things. However, philosophy is really important at this point, but the heyday of philosophy is actually in the past, and in fact, at this point, philosophy's there as sort of the foundation for why people are thinking the way that they are, but people are migrating away from philosophy and actually into religion at this point. So the entire framework of thought for the Western world, as we know it today, has already been laid, but people are starting to move towards religion because there are all these ideas of like, yeah, I'm looking to achieve virtue, I'm looking to achieve like these good things, what have you, but there's not really a whole lot that I can do myself, so how can I accomplish these things outside of myself? Okay? They're looking for things to provide this virtue, this absolute good. They're looking to find meaning and purpose outside of themselves, and religion seems to be doing a pretty good job of doing that. So let's talk really quick about the Greco-Roman religion. Very big aspect of it now, and I'll go ahead and click it to the next slide. Nope, go back. Okay, we'll keep it there. I was wrong. Greco-Roman religion. Very, very big part of it is, if you will remember, Caesar Augustus is a big deal, capital B, capital D, TM, big deal. and he knows it, and he wants you to know it. And in fact, throughout the entire Roman Empire, there is a cult of emperor worship. It is the most dominant form of religion that is undertaken by anyone in the Roman Empire. If you want to prove that you are a good Roman, you are going to make sacrifices to the Roman god, who is the emperor. You're going to make a sacrifice to Caesar. And it's essentially your way of saying this: I am a good, healthy, patriotic Roman. They are going to require that in order to be a good Roman, you must worship the emperor. I've been talking too much today, I apologize. So whenever we talk about like Roman gods, Greek gods, we can all name quite a few of them: Zeus, Poseidon, Heracles, Demeter, Artemis, etc. I'm just naming a bunch of Greek ones. The Roman ones would have changed their names by now, which is why instead of Heracles, it's Hercules. Hercules is the Roman version of that name and not Greek. And if you didn't know now you know. It's something that many people don't care about, but I do. I notice it. The gods exist, and people understand that at this point they're basically just stories. They understand that it is mythology. So even though people might still, maybe some of them are being gradually drawn towards like the pantheon. You'll notice there are temples to Artemis, temples to Zeus that are mentioned in the New Testament. That's sort of on the way out. That's kind of old news. Those are old gods. They're more myth than a representation of the true belief. There's a movement away from polytheism, which is why the Greek and Roman gods are on the way out, and more moving towards one God. And this is as a result of philosophy. Plato taught a lot about this one God. And what's interesting is like whenever we think about Plato and these ancient philosophers, we don't really think of them as religious people, but they really kind of are, because they are, again, moving towards the singular, all-powerful God. But they don't understand this to be the God of the Old Testament, the God is revealed to his people, the Israelites. They just think of God as like a supreme being. There's just like this supreme, ultimate good that must exist if the world is the way that this is a lot. Plato teaches about that a lot. And so this idea that humanity needs to move towards something, and if the old gods aren't doing anything, and philosophy is a useful tool, but philosophy is sort of like a ladder for us to ascend. What are we ascending to? We need to move towards something, but how do we do that? So here's a fun word for you. It's Mithraism. And this is an example of what's happening a lot around then. There are what are called mystery cults. Earlier this year, I talked about the word mystery, and this is part of why it's mentioned in 1 Timothy, is that the word mystery reveals to like secret doctrine or secret knowledge. And so whenever Paul is writing to Timothy and he says like, this is the mystery, like the mystery of godliness, he's basically saying this hidden knowledge, here it is, it's right here, it's for you. I'm going to reveal it, yeah. Is this like to the occult? Not yet, not sort of. A cult is basically just kind of like a secret sort of worship, I think. There's like cult has a very different connotation now than what it was originally intended to be. We'll see how it gets there, but essentially there's like a form of like private worship. And like we would say like there is a cult as part of like what we do as Christians. Like there is a specific like we are here, we're not like out in public doing the sort of things that we do. So like we are not a cult, but there's like the concept of cults exists as a part of worship. Yes. Yeah, not a cult, not yet. That will show up later. These are sort of like mystery religions that are sort of popping up every now and then, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens. Mithraism is just one example that we're going to bring that we're going to look at really quick. There was basically a Persian warrior god who was transmuted into a lord. So he was human, and then he ascended and became God. Mystery, again, is a sort of secret doctrine that they're going to be looking at. And wouldn't you know it, this Persian warrior god, who was then able to ascend and become a god, that sounds really good, especially if you are a warrior. So if you are a soldier or a young man, this seems kind of aspirational. Maybe if I am like Mithras or whatever his name was, I can be like him and I can become a god myself. And some of the tenets of this particular mystery cult are courage and honor. These are the things that you need to strive for. And this is actually a really big competitor with Christianity until the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries. So it's just kind of off in the background. We're actually not going to talk about it a lot because they're doing their own thing. There are plenty of other mystery cults, and we have some examples of mystery cults where in order to get rid of your dirtiness, what you would do is you would climb down into a pit and they would sacrifice a bull over the pit so that the blood would then drench down, would come down and drench you entirely, and the blood would wash you clean. Seems a little interesting, right? It almost seems that there are so many people with tiny little pieces of what they understand, because we understand that we are washed clean by blood. But it's not the blood of a bull. But see, they have ideas. It's like they heard a song on the radio and they're humming the chorus out of tune. It's like there are all these little pieces that throughout there, they understand that there are things that they need to do that are going to lead to deeper truth, but they don't have the proper application of it. And so the big contender that we're going to touch upon now and then get back to here in a little bit is called Gnosticism, which I believe is, yes, Gnosticism. During the 1st century, it's like a mystery cult. There is no one-size-fits-all version of Gnosticism, but there are a bunch of different individual elements and conjoining of these individual elements that we would call Gnostic or Proto-Gnostic. So it's essentially I can't give you a specific example of what they're doing, but if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. There are a bunch of things that they all have in common with each other. So there is a tendency in Greek and Persian thought towards forms of fundamental and eternal dualism. And again, if I have sort of these outlined in the notes, if I don't pay explicit I'm pausing to inflect on this particular thing, I'm sorry. I don't have those notes. I have my own notes. So I apologize. Feel free to get with me afterwards and I can give you the answers to your notes. But there are these fundamental and eternal dualism. There are things that are good, clearly, obviously, and things that are clearly and obviously bad. Greek and late Persian forms of Gnosticism, and later on this is going to really manifest itself, and it's going to be a really big problem for the church as it gets ready to start off, is the worthlessness of matter over the eternal, changeless world of the spirit, reason, etc. So essentially, there are good things. The spirit, that is good. The soul is good. Heaven is good. And because these things are good, can a soul ever not be good? No, the soul is inherently good. The spirit is inherently good. Heaven is inherently good. It is always good, and that means it cannot change. I don't know if any of you have ever spent any amount of time alive, but there's a whole lot about life that changes. So on the bad spectrum of things, you've got the material everything. The material world is evil. Your body changes. It's evil. Your mood changes. Well, that's evil. Food changes. You need it to live, but food is inherently evil. The earth itself is evil. It's not exactly a stoic sort of viewpoint, but it's more Platonic in nature in the sense that there is an eternal supreme good being who is unchangeable. We recognize that this is true. Plato is dancing around the truth, but he doesn't quite arrive at the right answer. So these things are good, but the world that we live in isn't good. Again, you can see they've got the right idea, they just don't know how to properly apply it. So how does one move from the bad, the evil, the changeable, the corrupt into good? And it's this idea that you have to get knowledge, or gnosis. That's where the Gnosticism comes from. It is the ultimate pursuit of this knowledge. There are secret rites and rituals and words. You need passwords. It's like after you die, if the example would be if you died and you go into the pearly gates and St. Peter goes, the answer to the tree of fish is, and he would wait for your passphrase. And if you were in the right Gnostic cult, you would have that knowledge, and you could get into the next layer of heaven, and so on and so forth. And it's very culty. There are secret signs and rituals and passwords that you would need to do in order to progress further into the divine beyond. So that is what they are going to. They are going to say that knowledge, understanding the secret information, is going to give you release from the evil realm of matter. It's not just knowing things, but you have to know the right things. Because if you know the right things, that's actually going to do something for you. The right knowledge can even bring you salvation. But you have to make sure you're in the right Gnostic group, because only our Gnostic group has the secret salvation knowledge. Those other guys don't. So mystery religions, as well as some of the philosophical schools of thought, had talked about there being secret knowledge. If we're looking towards something, and not all things can give us virtue or access to the supreme good, there has to be some sort of actual answer, and since not everyone knows it, it must be secret. Again, you can see where they're coming from. They're dancing around the truth. They all have pieces of a much larger puzzle that can only be brought together through the divine revelation from God. So, in light of all this, let's say you're an average, 1st century BC or AD, you pick, and you want to know how to get to heaven, because philosophy sounds pretty good. I understand that there is an ultimate good, and perhaps there is a supreme being that I'm working towards, but how do I get there? The gods can't give it to me. There are all these different schools of thought and all these different mystery cults. People are, bathing in bull blood, and people are getting these secret handshakes and their passcodes. How do I know what's right? There's an undercurrent of despair, or at least, you might say realism, about understanding that we can't fathom this deep philosophical nature of the world, because if you've ever tried to understand just the concept of eternity, our finite brains have trouble grasping these infinite concepts. And they're trying to tackle these big concepts just using their brains, just using philosophy, and just using their intellectual prowess. And this whole time, philosophy is also concerned, it has to do with people. So we understand there's it's not just about the individual, but there is a communal aspect as well. We need to understand that there needs to be meaning for humans, as well as what's the point of philosophy if it doesn't ultimately bring you happiness? I achieve these things like virtue and good, and these things make me happy. So that's sort of the background of thought that's happening right there. So let's go ahead and let's talk about what's happening back in the priesthood with the temple. Yes. So if you will recall, the Romans came in and they kicked out the Hasmoneans, or the Hasmoneans. They kicked out that dynasty and they replaced it with the Herodians. And essentially Herod is king, but he's kind of a puppet king. In fact, he's not even actually king. He can't really do a whole lot. But he can appoint the high priest, which means that the high priesthood is a political appointment, which is not exactly a good thing when you want the high priest to be a spiritual man of God who is going to lead the people into proper understanding and worship of God. But either way, Herod rebuilds and refurbishes the temple in sort of undercutting the spiritual nature of the high priesthood appointment. It sort of leaves the people dissatisfied or disillusioned with what Herod can do for them. So if the high priesthood is compromised, is the high priesthood of any use to practicing Jews? Not so much. It's kind of a sham office. So if the high priest isn't going to lead us into a proper understanding of the word, it falls on the common man. And wouldn't you know it, that's where the Pharisees are going to step in there and show this is how you can be practically pious. So even then, with the undercurrent or undergirdings of philosophy, people are looking for practical ways in order to achieve this good thing, and the Jews are sort of swept up in this as well. We haven't heard from God in 400 years. The Romans, the philosophers, they're having all these ideas of how to get to good. We have the Word of God revealed to us, but how do we actually apply it? The Pharisees come in and fill that role. So also, with the temple not having a lot of confidence in the priesthood and the political side of things, this is where the apocalypticism is going to really rear its ugly head, which means that things are really bad. Things cannot get worse right now, which means that God is going to come soon. He's going to send his Messiah. And yes, all of this is true. God is about to send his Messiah. And all of these people have a real, genuine desire for God's promised salvation. And this is in light of the fact that the Jews who are in charge are corrupt, and the Roman Empire who is in charge is corrupt. The only person who can fix this broken system is the Messiah. So again, all these things are radicalizing people essentially for whenever the actual proper application of the truth shows up, it sort of slots neatly into place. All these disparate peoples, from the Gentiles to the philosophers, who are also Gentile, but the Jews as well, the Pax Romana, all of this is the perfect setting for the arrival of the true Messiah. So you might notice that a lot of these people have like ideas. I call it echoes of the truth. They're full of error, especially when we compare it to Christianity, but these religions and philosophical movements are addressing these really deep needs in people. Because people are dissatisfied with the way that the world is, and they long for the truth and good and beauty of what we know to be the revealed nature of God and his son Jesus, we can see that God is preparing the hearts of men and women throughout the world for the arrival of his son. It's not just the Roman Empire, it is schools of thought that hundreds of years, and we know that this was God's plan from the very beginning, so it should come as no surprise whenever it finally gets on the scene that the Lord is going to be adding to their number daily. So, we're going to actually skip ahead a little bit and skip most of the New Testament now, and we're going to see how the Jews and the Christians stop really being friends. It's not a very pretty picture, but you'll notice Jews were able to practice their faith, true or false, and under the Roman Empire. True. It's what's called a religio licenta. Religio licenta. It's a licensed religion. It's not harming Rome. You guys were our friends in the past. We will allow you to do your religion. Relations between Rome and Judea are okay, and then they get to be good from about 161 BC into the 1st century. During Herod Antipater's reign from 37 BC to AD 4, Jews are exempt from military service. They don't have to take part in any pagan rituals, and they don't even have to worship the emperor. That's pretty good. That's from an old history that records what's been happening around that time. As we move further into the 1st century, the Romans just see Christianity as an offshoot of Judaism, so originally they tolerate it. Because it's another part of Judaism, Christianity gets sort of grandfathered into that religio licenta. They are licensed, they are able to practice, and that's pretty good. The church receives the same perks as Judaism. Christianity is a legal religion, protects the Christian church from state-sanctioned official persecution. However, if you read the book of Acts, you can see it starts to break down as it goes. In fact, we don't actually see a definite break and split until after the New Testament is finished. So Acts 1 through 5, we see traditional native Hebrews living in Palestine, especially in Jerusalem. In Acts chapter 6, we can see a dispute between the Hellenists and the native Hebrews. You'll notice they're butting heads a little bit. What does it mean to actually follow God? You claim Jesus, you want to be like us, but you're also not us culturally. You don't want to be circumcised, and if you'll recall, that's a really big deal, and that's one of the reasons why it gets brought up in the epistles time and again. Acts chapter 7, Stephen, who is a Hellenistic Jew, is more negative towards Judaism. He's a little more free with his speech, you might see, which also might contribute to why Stephen meets his end the way that he does. Acts chapter 8, the apostles, who are native Hebrews, are not affected by persecution. The Hellenistic section of the church seems mainly affected. So even then, we've got it's sort of like Judaism sees itself as this really healthy body, and they're the antibodies fighting out against the foreign infection that is these Hellenizers, these Greek Jews. It's an oxymoron. It doesn't make sense. They can't be like us. So persecution, if you're not wanted in an area, you know what you do? You typically leave. So the scattering of Hellenistic believers from Palestine was the event which first took the Jesus movement into the non-Jewish world. Again, in Acts chapter 8, Philip breaks the divide between Jews and Samaritans. Acts chapter 7, we hear about Cornelius, who is a Macedonian. You know where Macedonia is? It's just north of Greece. Acts chapter 11, we got the church at Antioch, first called Christians here, which would need a designation because they seem to be at least a little different from Jews, right? At this point, before Antioch, and even during this time, the Pharisees actually had their own name for Christians. They called them the Nazarenes because they're following a Nazarene. So up in Antioch, we've got a predominantly Gentile population up there, it seems like. Acts 13, now Paul is in full missions mode. He's taken over. Throughout his ministry, the gospel travels west into Europe rather than just staying put into Palestine. And now we see that since there's more of a move into the Gentile world as they are scattering about and Paul's going on his missionary journeys, well, now we're seeing a whole lot of ethnic diversity to Christ's church. But there's a theological divide that's going to start splitting these Jews from Judaism proper. Like you'll see, like there's a lot of stuff that sounds really good, but eventually, though, you put them in there, there's a reason why whenever Jesus rises up to speak in the synagogue, they don't really like what he has to say. So whenever you put Christians in with hardline Jewish people, there's a whole lot of friction. And because of that friction, there's a lot of persecution. And the Jews, who again are going to say, we are physically marked by God, we are circumcised, you are not, we're better than you, and we're going to act like we're better than you. So there are a couple of different options in the Jewish world among non-Christian Jews to figure out what to do with these new Jewish Christians, these Nazarenes. The Sadducees did not like them at all. They said, get rid of them. Actively go out there, persecute them. I don't know about killing yet, but we need to get rid of these people. They're an affront to our entire way of life, our religion. The Pharisees thought this might be a flash in the pan, so they were more of a hands-off, more of a wait-and-see option. So the Sadducees said to get rid of them. The Pharisees said, wait and see. And now I'm going to bring up an interesting point now to look at this. Nero's persecution, AD 64. This is the first state-sanctioned, but not empire-wide. So this is the first state-sanctioned persecution of Christians, but it is not widespread. It is not throughout the entire empire. It took place after a fire that burned for 6 days and nights and took down 10 of Rome's 14 districts. We know quite a bit about Nero. Not a lot of it is very good. We do know that Nero was very vain. He liked building things. So big theory is that maybe Nero set fire to Rome itself. And oh man, wouldn't you know it, since this fire took out all of our beautiful city, we can build a new and bigger city, a better city. In fact, this is where we get the common story of Nero standing on the roof of his palace playing his violin or his fiddle as Rome burns to the ground. So there's political rumblings, and the people are rumbling and they're saying, did Nero burn down like 70% of our city? And so Nero needs to make sure that the spotlight is off of him. And there's a really, really easy scapegoat just down the street. It's your neighbor. It's the Christians. He blamed Christian for it. Here's what the Roman historian Tacitus says. Quote, to kill the rumors, Nero charged and tortured some people hated for their evil practices, the group popularly known as Christians. Evil practices. We'll get into that because they were very evil people. I'll tell you why. The founder of this sect, Christ, had been put to death by the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate, when Tiberius was emperor. And again, you'll notice that we have a historical faith. Again, we have actual history that points to the truths that we can read about in Scripture. Their deadly superstition had been suppressed temporarily, but was beginning to spring up again. Not now just into Judea, but even in Rome itself, where all kinds of sordid and shameful activities are attracted and catch on. Again, these Christians are very evil people. Then, on information obtained from them, the court convicted hundreds more, not so much for starting the fire as for their antisocial beliefs. The Christians, antisocial. Because they would not worship the emperor or the gods of the pantheon. They're not patriotic. They're antisocial because they don't love Rome. They won't sacrifice to the emperor. In their deaths, they were made a mockery. They were covered in the skins of wild animals, torn to death by dogs, crucified or set on fire, so that when darkness fell, they burned like torches in the night. Nero opened up his own gardens for this spectacle and gave it a show in the arena. The reason I bring up this persecution right now is because here, AD 64, we have a secular emperor actively noting that they are Christians. They are separate from the Jews. Originally they were tolerated, but now they are completely separate. They are their own thing. So within 30 years, all the way in Rome, people are understanding that Christians are different. So then after that, we get into the Jewish War. Yeah. The Jewish War, the destruction of the temple, that's going to happen in AD 70. The Jewish War takes place from 66 AD to 73 AD. There's an uprising against Rome led by the Zealots. You might remember them from last week. Very active, patriotic assassins for hire. Josephus estimates that there were 1.1 million Jews killed in the Jewish war, but he might be fudging his numbers a little bit. Take it with a grain of salt. Up and with the destruction of the temple, and some 97,000 taken captive to be sold into slavery or put to death in the Roman arenas. Christians were spared because, if you will recall in Luke chapter 21, what did he say to do whenever there was persecution coming? Leave, flee, run to the hills. Woe to the pregnant women in that day. Palestinian Christians left when the persecution started getting turned up by the Romans. They left Jerusalem. They weren't wanted there. They knew that things were going to be really bad because there was so much political unrest. There was warfare, fighting. Rome's armies were on the march. They left. And you know what we call people who leave as the fight gets going? Traitors. The Palestinian Jews view Palestinian Christians as traitors, cowards. They would not fight Rome. So the temple gets destroyed in AD 70, and this takes the line that had been drawn in the sand between Jews and Christians and widens it. So now it's not just a line, it's more of a chasm. There is, I encourage you, you should make note of this, look up the Siege of Masada. The Siege of Masada, it's a giant peninsula where there are these last vestiges of Jewish fighters hold up. It's really, really cool. They were up there for 3 years. And I mentioned this to get you to look it up because the pictures are awesome. It took 3 years for the Romans to build a giant ramp up into the Masada Peninsula, or plateau. I think I said peninsula, it's a plateau. And as they got up there, in order to finally take this last sect of Jews out, all the Jews were dead. They had committed suicide to go out on their own terms rather than be taken captive by the Romans. So check out the Siege of Masada. I can't do it justice, but then again, I feel like I can't do anything justice in the brief time that we have mentioning this here. Yes, out in the desert, very arid, hard to get water, and they were up there for 3 years. It's insane. So these are the types of people who are going to go up there and hold out for 3 years. And whenever you hear about that courage and that bravery to withstand the siege of the Romans for 3 years while they had to watch the Romans build this gigantic earthen ramp up to them, and then the Christians just left, you kind of understand why there is some animosity there. So the aftermath of all that is that the Jews are going to sort of redefine how they're going to deal with Christians. The Pharisee option of wait and see, get rid of that. We do not tolerate Christianity anymore. Now, there's no temple. The temple has been destroyed. So what do? You've got to study the law yourself. When God said that he would write his law on your hearts, we're going to show you how to do that because we don't have the temple anymore. So now everybody must study the law. All Jews should aspire to study the law. And in fact, there's a word that we call the Am Haaretz, which means peasantry, and I'm going to butcher any and all words that are foreign to me. I apologize. So the peasantry refers to a group of people by AD 135 as Jews who don't study the Torah as a way of life. They're called peasants. These are second-class citizens. If you're not going to study the law, there is no temple anymore. It is up to you to hold the word of God because the temple can't do it anymore. So now they're going to, again, start erecting these barriers around themselves, metaphorically, figuratively, socially, economically. We're going to, again, appeal to tradition. We don't have the Torah anymore, so now we just have to rely upon the traditions, the Tanakh. How do we apply the Torah in our life? So now that we don't have the temple, we're moving into this new era of what that's going to look like practically. And if you don't get on board, you're not allowed in. You are not invited. You are not welcome here. So Jewish believers are excluded from synagogue worship. You cannot worship God with Jews now if you are a Christian. We do not like you. You're gone. So now, at this point, Christianity is moving out on its own. So if you will recall, whenever they were in that area in Jerusalem, that's where Jesus spent a lot of his time, right? So that, like, Jerusalem needs to be like the epicenter of holiness. But when the Romans come and the Christians leave, well, now we don't have one specific area that is the headquarters of Christianity. Christianity is moving out on its own. And wouldn't you know it, when Christ was talking about tearing down the temple, rebuilding it in 3 days, well, we don't need the temple anymore because we become the temple. So now we don't have a physical building to rally around and be sad at whenever it gets destroyed by pagans. Now we house the Spirit of God ourselves because we are the temple. Christ sits on the thrones of our hearts. So now this is the new Israel that gets spread out, the true Judaism, what Judaism was always meant to be. And so there is a very big shift towards gentilification of Christianity. There are lots of Gentiles. We're moving out into areas all over the place. And it's really easy because everybody can speak Greek. We've got the Septuagint. Everybody can move to wherever they want to in the Roman Empire and have the same sort of foothold as any other part. Northern Africa, Spain, Italy, Asia Minor, Turkey, all throughout that. So now we've got the context that we can take the gospel into, and because of the mystery cults who all sort of had like these little pieces of what the gospel was kind of like and how God works, it's a ready-made fit for whenever we bring the true application in that. You were made clean by the washing of a bull. Do you feel clean? What if I told you there was a God who became a man, who shed his blood, and by that blood, the blood of a God who became a man, you can be cleansed from your sins? Here's how. Just like that, Christianity fits in with all of these different areas because these shadows had been there from the beginning, so that way whenever the light was moved in there, the shadows disappear, and now you can actually see what everybody was moving towards. So now we don't really see as much dealing with the Jewish-Gentile issue as we move out. The prominent writings of the Apostle Paul, because that bridge has almost been burned, so to speak. Instead, the church is going to start charting new frontiers. Much of the New Testament is written to address the conflicting persecution of the Jews against the Gentiles, the Hellenizers, these people who are just trying to come in and, colonize their religion, so to speak. What needs to happen now? Well, now there's a pretty big split between from Judaism and Christianity. So the church is going to have to start up its own identity now, rooted in these different Gentile nations. And it's going to have to start addressing some very different controversies that are going to pop up, like philosophy or what the Romans might have to say about how things are run, like emperor worship. That's going to have to be a topic that we address next time. Does anybody have any questions? So again, all these things set the stage for the perfect spread of Christianity. And I say it's perfect because it is comprehensive, not that it just, oh, of course, Christianity is the way. Come on over. Let's completely change the way that we run the entire world. Not yet. We'll get there, but not yet. No more questions? I say more questions. We haven't even had one. Any questions not relating to the topic at hand? I'll answer anything. May not be the answer you want, but you'll get an answer. Yes, it is a dinosaur head. I painted it. I'm working on it. It's almost done. Yes? When was Israel annexed into the Roman Empire? The process was started in like the 60s BC, and then sort of officially in like 20 or so. Like they brought in like there's sort of like a, hey, you belong to us now in 63 BC, I believe. And then it wasn't until later on that they became like fully like, they're here, there's a Roman governor, you get nothing. It wasn't until they actually instigated the Herodian dynasty. It was before Caesar. It was, I'll have to look at my notes. It's from last time. Started with a P. What was it? It was Pompey, yes, thank you. It was Pompey. 63, not yes. No, that's right. It's Pompey. He comes in and he, like, there were those two brothers who were the sons of a queen. They both like fought a war. They both asked Rome for help, and Pompey sided with one of them, came in, kicked the other one out, and the other one said, cool, I get to be king now, right? Right? No. Doesn't get to be king, and eventually that whole line gets tossed aside in order to institute the Herodians. And eventually later on you will see some people referred to in the New Testament as Herodians because they support that dynasty, a puppet dynasty set in by a foreign occupying power. It's not a good look. All right. Anything else? All right. I'll go ahead and close this with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the study of history. It is your story, Lord, the story of man's failures and inhibitions, but your successes and your wonderful creativity in how you go and prepare men's hearts for change, for the gospel. We thank you so much that we can see your wonderful hand moving throughout history, and we don't have to be caught off guard whenever we see these things in our own lives today. We can understand that we don't have the proper perspective, but we know that since you are sovereign over all of history, you are still sovereign today. And we thank you that you are still moving, that you are still preserving your church, that you are raising up men and women to accomplish your will, to progress and further the kingdom every single day. I pray that we would live in a manner worthy of your calling, and that someday people will read about the wonderful things that your church did today. And it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right. Grab a donut on the way out. Yeah, it's really cool. It's so cool.